I didn't notice the road until the sheriff showed up on my front porch. It was 7:13 a.m. I was barefoot, sipping black coffee, trying to coax the Wi-Fi router into functioning like it wasn't powered by squirrels. That's when I heard tires crunching gravel. Not from the driveway, from the south pasture. And then came the knock. Firm. Government issued. "Mr. Eastwood," said the deputy aviators and all, "we need you to unlock the gate. You're obstructing a public thoroughfare." I blinked. A what? He motioned behind him. That's when I saw it. A freshly paved, 2-lane asphalt road, bright yellow divider lines and all, cutting directly across my southern pasture like someone had played SimCity. Drunk. I couldn't breathe. My fence had been cut. My gate was chained shut from the other side. And beyond it, a line of minivans, HOA-issued golf carts, and a woman in yoga pants waving an iced coffee at me like I'd personally insulted her schnauzer. Apparently I was blocking school drop-off. "I don't know where you're from, deputy," I said slowly, "but that road wasn't there yesterday." He looked at his clipboard. "According to Meadow Glen HOA, this is an emergency access lane approved by community vote." "Community?" I asked. "What community? My nearest neighbor is a herd of elk. You'll need to remove the barrier or face legal action." I smiled. "Let me get my lawyer." I didn't have a lawyer yet, but I had Linda, my wife of 35 years, my partner in crime, and the scariest woman west of the Rockies when provoked. When she heard what happened, she marched outside in her robe and demanded answers. That's when Beverly showed up. Yep, that Beverly. Former beauty queen turned HOA president turned land pirate. She wore a visor, a tennis skirt, and the smug expression of someone who once got a barista fired for spelling her name with an I. "Tom," she said, like we were old friends, "I was hoping we could chat neighbor to neighbor." "We're not neighbors." "Ooh, but we are. Meadow Glen just finished expanding our residential zone. This access road improves emergency response times by 43%. I blinked. "You mean that thing bulldozed across my land without permission?" Beverly beamed. "It's for the greater good. You should be grateful." Then she handed me a folder. Inside, a cease and desist letter for obstruction of a public route. HOA bylaws, which, fun fact, I never signed. And, get this, a fine for unauthorized gate placement. My gate on my land. If you've ever had your property invaded by a yoga cult and SUVs, smash that like button and tell me your HOA horror stories in the comments. Because this was just the beginning. I spent the rest of that morning walking the road, my pasture, with a GoPro and a measuring wheel. Asphalt poured straight through my alfalfa field, neatly cutting across a creek bed, up the ridge, and through what used to be my late grandfather's barn foundation. No survey markers, no permits, no signatures, just asphalt. I posted the footage online. It went semi-viral. HOA builds secret road through rancher's property. By 5 p.m., a local journalist named Rachel showed up in a dusty Subaru, camera in hand and a glint in her eye. I told her everything. She asked one question. "Do you have proof you own the land?" I pulled out the deed. Dated 1979, my name, notarized, parcel coordinates, and a family crest we didn't even know we had until someone Googled it. That night, while Linda made chili and the dog guarded the gate like a wartime soldier, I drafted my response. To whom it may concern, at Meadow Glen, HOA. You've trespassed, you've built illegally, you've endangered my livestock, you've messed with the wrong engineer. Expect litigation. Sincerely, Tom Eastwood. Rancher, engineer, very petty old man. The next day, I padlocked the gate. I installed trail cams. I even posted a sign. Smile. You're about to be a court exhibit. I thought that'd be the end of it. Then came the drone. Black, silent, hovering 20 feet above my head while I loaded hay. It had a camera. I grabbed my shotgun. No, I didn't shoot it, but I sure as hell threw a pitchfork hard enough to knock it into the pond. Beverly showed up 10 minutes later. Tampering with HOA surveillance equipment is a crime, she shrieked. I stared at her. Spying on private property is a crime. She pulls out her phone. We'll see what the sheriff thinks. We did. And what he said. Sir, you may need a real lawyer. You ever heard a group of suburbanites say the word easement like it's a magic spell that makes private land vanish? That's what I walked into at the Meadow Glen HOA emergency session, which, by the way, was held at the clubhouse they built on what used to be wetlands. The irony? Completely lost on them. I wasn't invited. I showed up anyway. Linda insisted I wear a collared shirt. I compromised with my cleanest flannel. The moment I walked through the double glass doors, the room went silent. 30 residents in folding chairs turned to face me, like I'd walked into a cult meeting wearing a Target logo. Greg Simmons, HOA board vice president and walking ego complex, stood at the podium with a laser pointer and a smug grin. Ah, Mr. Eastwood, you're just in time. I sat, dead center, arms crossed. Greg clicked to the next slide on the projector, a crudely photoshopped map showing the emergency access corridor slicing through my ranch. A careful review, he said. The board has voted to designate this corridor as a shared-use emergency lane under Easement Code 17C. That's when I raised my hand. You know that's not a real thing, right? He didn't blink. Under our community charter, you mean that packet of nonsense you handed out with a welcome cookie I cut in? Chuckles from the back. Greg didn't like that. He straightened his tie. The board has also received testimony from longtime residents, some of whom claim this path has always been a public right-of-way. Through my barn? Historic usage. Greg, that barn burned down in 1986. There was a horse named Dozer living in it. Not a Subaru. He moved on. A woman with a half-finished mimosa raised her hand. So, will the HOA be paving over more of the field for guest parking? My jaw clenched so hard I heard cartilage pop. Greg smiled. Pending approval. I stood. Let me be crystal clear. You do not have the right to build a road, easement, bike path, or lemonade stand on my land. You have no permit, no survey, no authority. You've trespassed, and you've tampered with livestock fencing. That's felony material. Greg's face went cold. Mr. Eastwood, if you continue to threaten this board... I pulled a rolled-up document from my jacket and slammed it onto the table. My title, legal description, signed, sealed, and backed by the county clerk. You are on my land. Someone gasped. Greg fumbled his clicker. The projector flashed no signal. That should have been the end of it. But the next morning, I found a note zip-tied to my mailbox. Corruption within 48 hours or face civil penalties. HOA enforcement team. They called it an obstruction. It was a gate with a padlock on my fence. I called the sheriff. He said it was a civil matter. I called a lawyer. He said it was a nightmare. Then came the incident that flipped everything. It was just after 9 p.m. I was doing a last-minute check on the livestock when I heard tires on gravel. I ducked behind the tractor and peered across the pasture. Two teenagers in hoodies were trying to cut the padlock with bolt cutters. One had an HOA lanyard swinging from his wrist. I stepped forward, flashlight blazing. They bolted like rabbits. I chased them halfway to the creek before my knees reminded me I was 63 and not in a Liam Neeson movie. But I got a good look at the license plate. Linda called it in. The car belonged to Greg's son, Brandon Simmons, age 17, whose online footprint included one too many TikToks about taking back public land. I brought this to the HOA the next day. Greg claimed his son was just out getting fresh air. Beverly said the board had no knowledge of any unsanctioned enforcement efforts. I said, "That's funny, because the zip tie note had your signature, Beverly, right next to a smiley face." They said it was a misunderstanding. I said, "So was the Boston Tea Party." From that day on, I installed security cams, signs, trail cams. I even installed a motion sensor that blared my best Clint Eastwood impression. "You're trespassing on private property. Turn around or you'll be starring in a viral court case." The best part? I emailed all the footage to Rachel, the journalist, and she aired it. Prime time. Ho accused of land theft in rural Wyoming. The next morning, I woke up to find my gate ripped clean off its hinges. They had driven through it. A maroon SUV with a Greg 2026 HOA Accountability Starts Here bumper sticker was stuck halfway through the mud. Inside it, a Starbucks cup, a box of HOA flyers, and a single rubber chicken. I'm still not sure about the chicken. I didn't call the sheriff this time. I called the courthouse, because if they wanted a legal battle, it was time to bring the heavy artillery. When the judge shows up to your ranch with a U.S. Marshal and a clipboard, you know things have officially crossed the line from suburban drama to Netflix miniseries. But let me rewind 72 hours. After the HOA's SUV gate crashing stunt, I didn't go full cowboy vigilante, tempting as it was. Instead, I went full legal nerd. I filed for a temporary injunction, backed with photographs, surveillance footage, GPS coordinates, and more highlighted municipal code than a zoning commissioner's daydream. My attorney, Sarah Rodriguez, was a pit bull in pearls. She'd spent 12 years suing cities on behalf of small farmers, and she had an allergic reaction to HOA nonsense. When I walked into her office and dropped the folder, she flipped through it silently and said only one thing: "We're going scorched earth." He wasn't kidding. He filed the injunction within hours. By the next morning, we had a court date and a furious Greg Simmons serving me with a countersuit for willful obstruction of community access. His lawyer looked like he'd just been printed from a Wall Street intern template. Slick hair, pocket square, the works. Sarah took one look at him in the courtroom and said, "Bless his heart," like a Southern executioner. We stood before Judge Cormac Henley, an 80-year-old war veteran turned circuit judge who had a face like cracked granite and a voice like a diesel truck. Greg opened with some flashy nonsense about emergency access lanes and communal safety. He referenced some HOA memo from 2011 about long-range neighborhood expansion plans and tried to argue that my pasture was unclaimed utility easement. Sarah stood up with one sheet of paper, my deed registered, dated, sealed. Then she pulled out the ace. "Your Honor, not only is this land not zoned for access, but the HOA knowingly trespassed, caused structural damage, harassed the property owner, and orchestrated multiple unauthorized entries, including one involving minors with bolt cutters." Greg stammered, "We didn't authorize that." Sarah tapped a photo on the overhead projector. "Then why does your signature appear on the enforcement notice zip-tied to my client's gate?" The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Simmons, Are you familiar with the term malicious trespass? Greg tried to smile. It was all a misunderstanding. The judge didn't smile back. He signed the injunction on the spot, and that's when it got federal. Turns out, part of my land overlapped with a federally protected irrigation zone. The creek they paved over? Yeah. That was listed in a Department of Agriculture wetland preservation program. Within 48 hours, the county water district, the state agricultural board, and a representative from the U.S. marshals were knocking on my door. Their mission? Survey the damage, investigate potential violations, enforce compliance. In other words, bring the hammer down. When they arrived, Beverly was holding another HOA meeting by the dock, complete with lemonade, folding chairs, and a guy playing acoustic covers of Coldplay. The marshals walked straight through the picnic like a SWAT team in church. "Ma'am," one of them said, showing his badge to Beverly, "we need you to vacate the area. This property is now under federal review." Beverly blinked. "Is this about the koi pond?" "No, Beverly, it's about the felony road building." They taped off the pasture like it was a crime scene, which, legally, it was. The next day, a federal survey crew arrived. They brought drones, measuring equipment, clipboards thicker than my tax returns. I watched from the porch, drinking sweet tea and petting the dog, as Beverly, Greg, and the rest of the HOA watched their asphalt dream get ripped up by backhoes. The crew dug deep, literally and figuratively. Turns out, the HOA had reallocated funds from the community maintenance budget to emergency infrastructure upgrades. That road? Paid for with money earmarked for the community pool and landscaping. Linda nearly choked on her lemonade when she heard that. It got worse. Rachel, the journalist, published the full story, front page, with a headline that read, "Opes, Road to Ruin, Federal Investigation Underway." The comment section exploded. HOA residents started holding their own impromptu meetings, in driveways, some waving torches, metaphorically, others actually showing up at Beverly's house, with lawn signs that read, "Bring back the pool." And just when you thought the circus couldn't get any more absurd, Beverly lawyered up. She sued me for emotional distress, citing public humiliation, undue stress, and reputational damage due to viral media coverage. Sarah almost laughed in the courtroom. "You built a road on someone else's land," she said. "And now you're upset people know?" Beverly blinked. "I've been receiving hate mail." Sarah smiled. "Good. Maybe file it alphabetically." But the final blow came during the federal restitution hearing. The court ordered Meadow Glen HOA to pay for complete road removal and land restoration, replace my gate and fencing, pay $50,000, 0 cents in damages, issue a public apology. And Greg, and he was fined separately for reckless endangerment and tampering with private surveillance equipment. Beverly, she resigned as HOA president the next morning. But that's not the twist. Because just when the dust started to settle, something came in the mail that made my jaw hit the floor. Do you ever get a letter that changes your entire perception of the people you've been fighting? It came in a weathered envelope, no return address, handwritten, postmarked from Oregon. Inside was a note that read, "You thought you might want the original paperwork. She probably doesn't even remember." Attached was a copy of an old land transfer deed from 1985 with a faded notary stamp and 2 names scrawled across the bottom. One of them was my grandfather. The other? Beverly D. Patterson. Yep, that Beverly. Apparently back in the mid-'80s, before her reign of clipboard terror, Beverly and her then-husband sold off a parcel of ranch land they'd inherited from her great-uncle, no less. A messy divorce followed, and the land changed hands multiple times. before finally ending up with my grandfather, who left it to me when he passed. So not only had Beverly known the land was private, she'd literally sold it herself. My jaw hit the table. I stared at the paper for 10 full minutes before calling Sarah. She whistled when she read it. "You want revenge?" she asked. "Always. We're not suing the HOA anymore," she said. "We're suing Beverly, personally." At the next hearing, Sarah walked in with the deed, highlighted and enlarged like she was about to unveil a lost chapter of the Constitution. She slid it across the table to Beverly's new attorney, an exhausted-looking woman who blinked 3 times and muttered, "Are you serious?" The judge reviewed it. His expression didn't change, but the air got heavier. "Patterson," he said slowly, "did you knowingly initiate construction and regulatory action on land you had previously sold and no longer had any claim to?" Beverly's voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't remember." Sarah leaned forward. "So, either you intentionally tried to reclaim land that wasn't yours, or you're incompetent and never checked your own records." Beverly's lawyer interjected, "Your Honor, we'd like to request a continuance." "Denied," the judge said, slamming the gavel. The room jolted like he fired a starting pistol. From that moment forward, Beverly's downfall was no longer just public. It was historical. Rachel, of course, got hold of the deed. And because the internet is merciless, she published a new article. HOA president tries to steal land she sold in 1985. We have the receipts. It went viral, local news, national Twitter, even a satire site ran with the headline, "Woman accidentally evicts herself from ranch she already sold." By the end of the week, Beverly's reputation was toast. Her resignation wasn't enough. Neighbors were openly discussing criminal charges. A recall petition started circulating, but the universe wasn't done with her yet. Because then I found out something even juicier. Remember that land parcel the HOA tried to pave through? Turns out it connected to a second, undeveloped lot behind my ranch. Guess who owns it? Me. Yup. My grandfather had quietly acquired the adjacent land just before he passed. It had been sitting on the books, untouched, for years, and it held something no one in the HOA knew about. A natural spring. That's right. They tried to steal my road, my field, my privacy, and ended up almost building a paved liability directly on top of a federally protected spring. I brought this to the next emergency HOA session. Well, they called it Community Healing Night, but let's be real. I rolled in with a cooler, opened it on the table, and pulled out 6 crystal-clear bottles of water, each labeled. Frank said, "Eastwood property, private source." Then I passed them out. Greg didn't say a word. Beverly, sitting in the back with sunglasses and a scarf like she was in witness protection, simply stared at the label. I raised my bottle and said, "Do knowing what you actually own." They didn't clap, but a few people did chuckle. And later that night, I found a small note slipped under my door. No name, just a single sentence, written in surprisingly graceful cursive. I really did forget, but, sorry. It was the closest thing to an apology I ever got from Beverly. I didn't frame it or anything, but I didn't throw it out either. Next up is Section 5, Spring Water and Sweet Revenge, where we finish strong, tie it all together, and hit 'em with the final twist you'll want to replay twice. If there's one thing I've learned from this HOA war, it's this. Never underestimate the petty resilience of suburbia, or how sweet revenge tastes when it's spring-fed and legally notarized. After the deed revelation and the spring discovery, things didn't just settle, they shifted. Hugh Gray quietly stepped down from the HOA board for personal reasons. though the rumor mill said he'd been pressured by a group of moms who threatened to uninvite his wife from Pilates brunch. Beverly? Well, Beverly disappeared. Not like witness protection or anything, but she stopped attending HOA meetings. Her meticulously trimmed hedges started to grow wild. The monthly newsletters were now signed by Linda from Lot 12, who thought Comic Sans was a professional font. But I wasn't done, because I'd found out something during this ordeal that gave me an idea so perfect it felt like divine suburban justice. See, my grandfather hadn't just left me land. He'd filed easement rights, quietly, legally. And those rights allowed for controlled, educational access to both the pasture and the spring, for nonprofit or educational use. So I called my old college buddy Miles. Miles runs a nonprofit for environmental education. Think middle school kids learning how ecosystems work, water cycles, sustainable land use. I gave him a tour of the property, showed him the spring, the now reclaimed pasture, and laid out my plan. You bring the kids, I'll bring the lemonade, and together we'll give this HOA something to really complain about. 3 weeks later, on a bright Saturday morning, Beverly's former HOA kingdom woke up to the sound of a yellow school bus pulling into the old gravel lot behind my cabin. Out poured 40 kids, 3 teachers, and a guy named Jeremy with a beard that made him look like a human terrarium. He was the eco-curriculum specialist. We set up educational stations, composting, water filtration, birdwatching blinds. We even had a mobile chicken coop and a Meet the Worms booth. The final touch, a freshly painted wooden sign right at the entrance. The Eastwood Environmental Preserve. Open by appointment. Protected by state law. Greg drove by in his golf cart and nearly ran into a mailbox when he saw it. Linda later told me his exact words were, "You turn a ranch into a sanctuary?" Yes, I did. The best part? There was nothing they could do. The land was zoned for agricultural and educational use. The preserve was registered with the state. The easement rights had been notarized before the HOA had even been formed. Every move I made was legal, documented, and fully in the public interest. But wait, there's more. Rachel from Channel 4 came back for a follow-up segment. This time, she brought a camera drone. The aerial shots were glorious. Green trails, happy kids, signage with gold lettering, and a little kiosk where I handed out free bottles of spring water labeled, "Revenge, best served cold." She asked me during the interview, what message would you send to other homeowners dealing with overreaching HOAs? I smiled at the camera and said, know your rights, know your land, and never let anyone pave over your peace of mind. Literally or figuratively, that night, as the sun dipped below the pine trees, I sat on my porch with a glass of bourbon, watching the kids board the bus, waving goodbye. The spring trickled beside me. The dog snored at my feet, and Beverly, she watched it all from her second straw window, just visible between her dusty curtains. I raised my glass toward her house, just a small nod. And for a second, just a second, I thought I saw her raise a glass back. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe not. But that's the thing about HOA drama. It always ends with paperwork, property lines, and a damn good story. So, if you enjoyed mine, smash that like button. Leave your worst HOA story in the comments. And hit subscribe, because trust me, this neighborhood's just getting started.